this lesson entitled Calling to Salvation, we see a short man by stature by the name of Zacchaeus. He did some things that the people were not excited nor liked him about. However, he did something unique and it caught the attention of Jesus. Join me as we talk about what did he do, how did he get Jesus' attention, and what happened after that. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Sunday School lesson as taught by Pastor Rodney Jones. We go over the International Standard Sunday School lesson verse by verse, key words and key phrases. Welcome to your new subscribers. Thank you for subscribing to this channel. Those of you who have not subscribed, please take a moment, hit the subscription button below, the bell symbol to the side, and YouTube will notify you, bing! He just uploaded another lesson. A very good lesson once again. Our subject for today is calling to salvation. We're in Luke's Gospel, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Memory verse is the 19th chapter, verses 10. And I want to talk about the word salvation before we read the lesson. The word salvation means to be delivered out of danger into safety. We were delivered out of the danger of sin and captivity of the devil, but we were not left there. We were brought into safety. So we were delivered out of darkness into the marvelous light. And in this lesson, we will see that a man named Zacchaeus, who was not liked by people because of his job and the type of work that he did, we will see that he himself was changed. And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, or Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was going to be guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for as much as he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. This is the entire reading of our lesson. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word for the edification of our souls, and the people of God said amen. Now, this is the third lesson of this type where someone approached Jesus technically and basically out of the norm. They approached Jesus and they were all dealing with something that was unique. Some of this may line up in this particular lesson. The first one we find in Luke's Gospel, chapter 18, the earlier part, where Jesus was approached by the rich young ruler. However, he went away sad because he had much. Then we jump to Luke 18, around the 35th verse, And we see this blind man who was by the wayside begging. He also approached Jesus because he wanted to he wanted to be able to see and be placed out of his darkness, of which Jesus gave him his answer. And then it comes to our lesson that we're dealing with today, the 19th chapter, verses 1 through 10. We find a rich man by the name of Zacchaeus, who was a man of short stature. All three of these men approached Jesus. The first one and the third one were both rich. However, the first one went away sad because he did not want to get rid of his riches. The second one went away seeing he was poor, but he was blind, or he was blind and he was poor. And then this Zacchaeus, he was not poor, he was not blind, he was rich, but he was lost. And the simple fact that Jesus was willing to meet the requests of these individuals says something about who Jesus is. So we look at in this particular lesson, it says, and Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now, Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, beginning around the 9th chapter and the 51st verse, all the way up to the 19th chapter and the 27th verse. That whole scene was Jesus on his way to Jerusalem. He had to go certain routes because it was destined for him to do certain things. Even in this lesson, I'll show you, it was destined. It was the work of God. It was the will of God, the move of God, and even the unction, the divine plan and purpose of God and by God for Jesus to come to Zacchaeus' house. So he was on his way to Jerusalem, and as he was passing through Jericho, because Zacchaeus didn't live in Jerusalem, Zacchaeus lived in Jericho. So Jericho was a rich and a wealthy city. Jericho was known as the city of palms, and Jericho was a place that had a beautiful, bright smelling aroma in the atmosphere because of the things that it grew. And because of the things that it grew, and also it was a city that was located in the Jordan Valley, where you would gain access to Jerusalem and gain access to the other east ends of the Jordan, or a main pathway for other people to come to. And I'll tell you why I say that in a few more minutes. In other words, it had a lot of traffic. It was known for what it had, and people would take stuff from right there and ship it all over. So it was a wealthy city, and it was a very popular place to be. So Jesus is traveling on his way to Jerusalem. He's now traveling through Jericho. Verse 2 says, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. Seeing the fact that Jericho was a place of wealth, and it was a place that this product went from Jericho to other parts of the country, it had a lot of traffic that was coming through. Since it had a lot of traffic coming through, according to history, it is stated that they had a taxation. So you pay taxes coming in and you pay taxes pouring out. And so since it was so much going in and out, it was a lot of money being taxed. And because of that, they probably had a taxation or a posting station there, of which Zacchaeus, who not only operated, but appears that Zacchaeus had people working under him. And so he would be what we might call the governor of the taxes. He was the chief among the publicans. Another word for publicans would be tax collectors. He was the chief. He was the head man. He was the one that was in charge. He was the supervisor. He was the one that everyone came to. Now, two things about that. It is stated that because there was so much traffic going in and out, that a man could get rich in Zacchaeus' position without cheating. However, he could have still cheated. Plus, the Romans had it to where whoever was collecting taxes was free to add more anyhow. So that taxation thing was a lucrative business, as my dad would say. So of which Zacchaeus was, he was the chief. He was assigned to be over that, and he had people that was working under him. Verse 3 says, and he sought to see Jesus, who he was. He wanted to see who this Jesus was, because Jesus now has a multitude following him, and Zacchaeus can see the multitude coming from probably a long distance. He could see what's going on. Now, Zacchaeus is probably a man that will most likely be hated by his peers or by the Jews because of the type of work that he did. He was really working for the enemy. He was working for the oppressors. He was working for the Romans, although he was a Jew, because his name denotes that he is a Jew, because that is a Hebrew name, Zacchaeus. So he hears, then he sees that Jesus is coming. He wants to see, who is this Jesus that everybody is making so much a lot of fuss about. I must say this to the grand old church and to its members or constituents. We ought to make such a grand noise and such a great noise about Jesus until the world wants to look and to see who is this Jesus that everybody is making a fuss about. They make a fuss about Michael Jordan. They make a fuss about Michael Jackson. They make a fuss about Prince. They make a fuss about Donna or LaDonna or Prima Donna or whoever it is. They make fusses. We make fusses about people, and because we make fusses, it makes them important, and people come from all over, far and near, to go to the Bulls game, the Bears game, to go to the NFL and all of that. But we ought to make a fuss about Jesus, so that the world wants to know, who is this man? And then they can cry, what must I do to be saved? So he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. This man was not only rich, but he was small. Now it is said, for a Jew at that day and time to be considered as small, he would have to be less than 5 feet tall. That means that guy, you probably couldn't see him. You would walk past him and miss him because he was small. Luke says he was short in stature, or he was little in stature. So he got some things working against him, but he did not allow that to defeat what he wanted to do. He uses wisdom in this lesson. What does he do? What is his answer to seeing who this Jesus is? Verse 4 says, and he ran. Running denotes importancy. Running denotes urgency. Running denotes I must see. It's making haste. There's something that's important to me, and I need to go and see it. So he ran before. Notice he runs before because he can see the direction that Jesus and this crowd is going. So since he see where they're going, he runs ahead so that he can get a better picture of them. He goes up into what we call the balcony, because from the balcony you can see everything. So he climbs up into a sycamore tree to see, for he was to pass that way. And I'm here to tell you that people will do anything to get to Jesus when they're serious. I want to talk about something. He ran up a tree. Here's a man. I got to go in my preaching mode for one moment. Here's a man that's short of stature. Here's a man that's hated by his own people because of the type of work that he does. Here's a man that's probably hated by them also because he's not poor, but he's a rich. So he's a short man. He's a Hebrew working for the Romans against his own Hebrew family. Then he's short in stature. He sees that Jesus is coming, and he possibly can't get into the crowd because, number one, he's small. Number two, they probably don't want him nowhere around him. So he has a solution, and his solution is to run ahead and, in spite of everything, jump up in a sycamore tree so that I can see him. Help me say, he climbed the tree. Here is a grown man that is rich and wealthy, a grown, rich, and wealthy man that is ostracized by his peers. But this man comes up with a solid answer to help him accomplish his goal and his task. He, not a child, but he, a grown, short, rich man, climbs a sycamore tree so that he can see who Jesus is. And he was able to do it. Now, this sycamore tree, it was used as food for the poor. A rich man climbs a poor man's tree to see Jesus, who can heal and deliver both rich and poor. This lesson is just opening up. So it was used as food for the poor and bore fruit several times a year. And you'll find that in 1 Kings and the 10th chapter. And it was also planted along roadsides for its shade. That's, of course, in Luke 19, because many people laid under or sat under this particular sycamore tree because it was able to cast a shadow. And in that day and time, they needed it. Poor people used its wood rather than expensive cedar. You'll find that in Isaiah, the 9th chapter and verse 10. Now, it partakes of the nature of the mulberry tree as to its leaves, and the fig tree as to its fruit, which is very much like a fig in its shape and sizes. So this rich man is in a poor man's tree just to see Jesus. And one more thing about the sycamore tree, it is said in order for you to eat the fruit, you had to puncture the fruit and wait a couple of days before you can actually partake of the fruit. And I believe the majority of the fruit was at the base of the tree. It was low enough but wide enough for a man to climb up the tree and be able to get shade at the bottom, but be able to sit on it in the top of the branches so that he can see Jesus. Help me say he ran up a tree. My question is, what have you done unusual just to see Jesus? Verse 5 says, and when Jesus came to the place, here we go. Here we go. Greatness, which is Jesus, is about to meet somebody else. And this may be one of the only instances really where Jesus looks up to man. I just thought that I would look into that. I just thought I would throw that in there. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down, for today I must abide at thy house. Now, Jesus don't know this man physically or personally, but Jesus knows all things. He's omnipotent, omniscient, and he is omnipresent. He is all-knowing, he is all-power, and he is everywhere. He sees Zacchaeus because he sees the heart of Zacchaeus. When God sees our heart, he lets us know man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. When God sees the heart of man, he sees the intent of man, and God recognizes the actions of man, and God moves on the behalf of the heart of man. Out of the abundance of the heart, Jesus said, the mouth speaketh. Jesus comes to this place where Zacchaeus is, regardless of the crowd, regardless of the multitudes, regardless of the disciples, regardless of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, regardless of the scribes and the other sinners, regardless of everything that's going on. Jesus' focus is on a man whose heart's desire is to see him. Jesus recognizes the heart of Zacchaeus, although Zacchaeus in this lesson by his friends or countrymen is considered as a sinner. Some translations calls him a notorious sinner. He saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste, which means get in a hurry. Be anxious, because this is an urgent thing that's about to take place. This is important. This moment is ordained by God, and so is the next moment. He says, make haste and come down, for today. The word today lets us know that it is urgent, that it is important, that it is a sign this particular day. In other words, before God cracked the sky, before he made man, before he made time, before he said, let there be anything, this day was also included in the plan of God. And he said, today I must. Now the word must means that it is ordained by God. The word must means it is assigned by God. And the word must mean that this is the purpose of God. Because he said, he didn't just say, I'm going to come. He says, I must. This is the Son of the living God saying to another man, I must abide at the house. Now the word must is used in a divine sense. It means to be ordained of God, or it is an assignment. Something that has to take place to fulfill God's purpose. Now he says I must abide. The word abide means to remain or to dwell. Now, it is not clear whether Jesus is going to spend the night at his house or not. But the uses of the word abide, it does mean to stay. And keep in mind that Jericho was about 15 miles below, which means Jesus and his disciples has to travel 15 miles uphill. So they stop at this man's house to relax, to rest their feet, and to refreshen themselves. And oftentimes the guests spent the night. Scripture does not say. So he says, I must abide and make haste, and I have to come at your house today. Verse 6 says, and he made haste. Zacchaeus made haste and came down and received him. The word receive means to receive hospitably and kindly. It also means to care for or to care after, and it also means to host. So he received him gladly. The word joyfully means rejoicingly. He received him. Zacchaeus was rejoicing to have Jesus in his house. He was glad. He was excited. He was overdone. He was bowled over, as my dad would say. He was excited to receive Jesus into his home. And verse 7 says, and when they saw it, now here's where something kind of takes a shift. Usually they get upset with Jesus, right? They all murmured, saying that he was going to be guests with a man that is a sinner. Some translations calls him a notorious sinner. It's interesting because the word sin means to deviate, to miss the mark of God. So they're saying that this man, though he is a Jew, he missed the mark of God. I believe most of the people in that crowd, including the ones that were complaining, had already missed the mark of God. And Jesus was showing them something. He was illustrating something to them. This was actually what we might call a living parable. This is something that took place for the people to see as well. So when they saw it, they all began to murmur. Murmur means to express a grumbling attitude. To express a grumbling attitude. They was upset that he was the guest. And the word guest means here to refresh oneself. It also means to lodge. And to lodge also means to stay. So they was upset because now he is no longer with what they remember previously. They talked about he was going to eat with the sinners and the publicans. Now he's at a chief publican's house, and they get upset with him rather than figure out what is his purpose and his plan. They're upset because he's going to be with a sinner. Now look at verse 8. It appears that a change has taken place in Zacchaeus, because verse 8 says, and Zacchaeus stood. He stood. He didn't just sit. They were not in a relax. It's as if Zacchaeus changed his position and he stood before the Lord as if to say he was making an open confession. And he said unto the Lord, behold, I want you to look at something. And he called him a Lord. He called him Lord, which means he's probably referring to Jesus now as master or as sir. It appears that something took place that caused a change. Luke doesn't give us everything. Something apparently took place that caused a change in his life, and he now addresses Jesus as Lord. Sometimes Lord means master, husband, head, and sometimes it means sir, which is an honor of respect or a title of respect. He says, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Two things he says. Here's a man that's known for making a profit. Now he says to Jesus, my concern is no longer about profit. My concern is about doing right. My concern is about making you Lord of my life. My concern is about making restitution in life. He said, here, I will take and give half my goods unto the poor. First thing he wants to do, because it appears that he has now a change of heart. I want to take half of my goods and give them to the poor. Then he says, and if I've gotten anything by any man illegally, if I have overtaxed any man, he says, I will restore unto him fourfold. Now, actually, fourfold is the restoration when you take a man's sheep. Now, I think history says, or the law states, that you can go twofold to fivefold, but he exacts a number, and he says from his heart, I will return it unto him fourfold, because I have wronged him. That's a change of heart. Here's a man who's known for making a profit. Now, profit is the last thing in his mind. He wants to give it away because he's a changed man now. And Jesus says unto him, this day is salvation come. Notice where he says salvation is come. Not just to this man, but it says salvation has come to this house, which calls us to believe that Zacchaeus, if he has a family, his whole entire family now will be saved. So he says, for so much as he also is a son of Abraham, which lets us know that he was a Jew. And Jesus says, for the Son of Man is come to seek. He's come to seek. He's come to seek after. He's come looking for. He's coming to tear down things just to find. Because when you really reference the word seek, it literally means to tear down things just to find something that was lost. If you ever lost a coin, if you ever lost a clothing, you can't find that other shoe. You tear your room up just until you find that shoe. And sometimes you look in the same spot over and over and over, and you just throw things all over. That's the same word for seeking. He went through all of that seeking for the lost, because Zacchaeus was one of the sons of Abraham, but he was the lost generation. He says, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. So now salvation is come to the house of Zacchaeus. Now, salvation is Jesus. Jesus is salvation, but Jesus also brings salvation. Which means that even though the physical presence of Jesus leaves, his spiritual presence is still there. He is now within Zacchaeus and possibly his entire family. This is a good lesson, beautiful lesson, calling to salvation. So what we've got to do is make sure that we do not stereotype this entire world. Just because people do something that we either don't agree with, or they may be doing things that's illegal, it does not mean that Jesus cannot save them. What we must do is make it to where they want to see who is this Jesus that we're making such a great fuss about, so that they can climb up in a sycamore tree to see Jesus, so that he can see them, call them down, invite them into salvation. And then Jesus did something that was unusual. He invited himself into another man's home, and that man hosted Jesus. But from that moment on, that man's life was changed. Teaching the word of God in the spirit of excellence. And remember the motto of the Sunday school lesson: a child saved is a soul saved plus a life. Amen.